Alright, sorry about that. We lost our stream for a few minutes. Our wireless ended. So I'm gonna go back a little bit. Let's see, where would be a good place to go back to? Let's go back to the beginning of chapter 11, I guess. That would probably be a good place. Alright, so chapter 11. 206,784 years ago. A flash of white light filled the mid-afternoon haze of the Pleistocene epoch. And the crystal blue lake that had once been there was now gone. In its place were vast savanna plains stretching out to the thick forested hillsides and rocky caves. All was quiet, except for the sounds of insects and birds, and the faint, rhythmic drumming far off in the forest. "Where are we?" asked George. I think the better question would be, when are we? Super Mega Tippy was surprised to see George and Harold and Crackers and Sulu. "Well, well, well," he said. "It looks like we have 4 stowaways." But what Super Mega Tippy did not realize is they had a 5th stowaway as well. It was the slightly younger, tiny Tippy, who at that very moment was carefully crawling down the button on Super Mega Tippy's shirt. "That stupid Mega Tippy thinks he can lie to me and get away with it," said slightly younger Tiny Tippy as he jumped onto the control panel. "But I'll teach him a lesson he'll never forget." Slightly younger Tiny Tippy pried up an aluminum vent and slipped effortlessly into the wiry innards of the control panel. First, he reversed the polarity on the emulsifying slossifying inhibitor. Then he switched the blue and the green wires on the reverse globulating tracto-mcfractalizer. Finally, he snipped all the wires to the Freezy Beam 4000's off button. "Ha ha ha!" Yet laughed slightly younger Tiny Tippy. "The next time that big jerk uses his Freezy Beam 4000, he's going to get a big surprise." Meanwhile, the drama outside was getting serious. Super Mega Tippy swatted at our heroes as they soared bravely through the Iona sky. Crackers skillfully swooped and dove, and loop-de-looed as the Extendoflex Mega Gripper whizzed after him. But Super Mega Tippy quickly became impatient and unleashed 2 more Extendoflex Mechana Grippers. Poor Crackers could not outmaneuver them all, and the 4 friends were soon captured. "I've got you now!" screamed Super Mega Tippy. "Hey, look!" said George, pointing at the ground behind Super Mega Tippy. "There's a bunch of cavemen down there watching us." "I'm not falling for that trick," said Super Mega Tippy. "As soon as I turn around, you guys are going to try to escape." "No, seriously!" cried Harold. "We're not lying. Look behind you." Super Mega Tippy glanced quickly and noticed that the boys were indeed telling the truth. Standing behind them at the very edge of the forest were about a dozen very surprised-looking cavemen, staring up in dumbfounded bewilderment. "You boys shouldn't be surprised to see cavemen," said Super Mega Tippy as he studied the strange prehistoric people. "We're in the middle of the Pleistocene epoch. This is around the time that the first human families started to appear on Earth. Ah, but you dumb kids didn't know that, did you?" Super Mega Tippy turned to smile haughtily at George and Harold, but of course they were gone. Sulu had bitten through the 3 of the Extendoflex Mega Grippers, and the 4 friends had fluttered away. "No!" screamed Super Mega Tippy as he stomped his gigantic feet in frustration. The startled caveman screamed and ran in terror back to their homes in the deep forest. "Ah!" Super Mega Tippy grabbed some strong vines and tied Mr. Krupp to a boulder underneath a waterfall. "There," he sneered. "This should keep you moist and powerless until I get back." Then he stomped into the forest, searching for George and Harold and their pets. Chapter 12. Calling all cavemen! "How are we ever going to get out of this mess?" asked Harold. "I don't know," said George, "but we're going to need Tippy Tinkletousers if we ever want to get back home." "Are you kidding?" said Harold. "We can't trust that guy. He can't even trust himself." I know, said George, but Tippy has a time machine and we don't, so we're going to have to defeat him. But we need an army to defeat that guy, said Harold. So, let's go get an army, said George. The four friends glided above the grassy plains as they followed the sounds of beating drums. Soon they arrived at the forest. The drumming was getting louder. Crackers swooped down and landed behind some bushes near the caves. Just beyond them was the cave people village. George and Harold and Crackers and Sulu peeked over the thick bushes as they watched the cavemen and cavewomen go about their daily routines. They seemed peaceful, so George decided to speak up. "Hello," said George. "We come in peace. We are friends." The cave people looked confused and startled. They did not seem to understand. "Maybe they don't speak English," said Harold. "Eloe," said George, who only spoke one other language. "Iwe, onke, inwe, e pace. Iwe, our way, and phrase." That didn't work either. The cave people grunted and sniffed at George and Harold and their pets. But they said nothing. Suddenly, off in the distance, the sound of gigantic footsteps came thundering through the deep forest. Tippy was coming, and he was getting closer and closer with each terrifying stomp. "I know you're in that village," Tippy screamed, "but you can't hide from me!" Crash! Tippy crashed through trees and stomped into the village, kicking over the huts and smooshing everything in sight. The terrified cave people grabbed their children, and ran for the safety of the caves behind their village. George and Harold and Crackers and Sulu ran into the caves also, and hid with the cave people in the darkness as the destruction outside continued. After a while, some cave teenagers started a campfire. The flickering light illuminated the massive walls of the caves as the cave people whimpered and huddled together in horror. "Whoa," said George. "Some army they turned out to be." "It's not their fault," said Harold. "They've never seen gigantic robopants before. They're just scared." "If you could only communicate with them," said George. "There's got to be some way to reach them." Harold looked up at the gigantic blank walls of the cave. "How about pictures?" he asked. "Hey, good idea," said George. Harold walked over to the campfire and grabbed a charred, smoking stick from the burning cinders. Then he went to one side of the giant cave and started to create the world's first cave drawing. At first, the cave people were astonished. They'd never seen anybody draw before. They laughed and pointed and jumped up and down every time Harold drew something new. But when Harold drew Tippy in his robo-pants, the cave people became frightened. They grunted nervously and lowered their heads in fear and submission. "Whoa," said Harold. "How are we ever going to change their minds about Tippy?" "I know," said George. "Let's make a wordless comic. They'll understand that." "Good idea," said Harold. "Let's do it." So George and Harold found a letter and began creating the world's very first comic. The cave people watched with excitement as George and Harold's tale unfolded. Soon, their opinions about Tippy and his robo-pants began to evolve. You ready? Are you ready? So we're switching readers, and we're going to have someone start with chapter 13.
Just go.
Yep, we'll just go. I'll be your page turner.
Okay.
Swap.
Alright, hello. I should back up so you can see me. Alright, we're starting with chapter 13. The world's oldest comic, starring Ook and Gluck. Alright. Oh, there's no words on this one.
So it looks like we have a happy dinosaur, and he's frolicking, and he falls in the water, and he meets a fish,
Oh, a fish
and they're having
friend.
fun.
Alright.
And then he sees a really giant tall guy and pants. And the giant tall guy comes and stomps all their village up. Oh, look how angry the village people are. They are not happy. And then the robo guy chases the poor dinosaur out into a limb. Oh gosh, they're really sad.
Oh, it looks like he fell out of the tree.
Falls out of the tree.
Oh my gosh.
Oh.
Up into the water.
And our heroes, who are our heroes again? Let's go back.
That's it. Ook and Gluck.
Ook and Gluck.
Yeah.
They save their friend. Oh, look. They're so happy about it. But then our evil person shows up and starts to chase Ook and Gluck and their new little tiny dragon friend. They're smart, and they make a little trip thing, and they call him over, and he chases them, and he trips,
Oh.
and he falls, and he hits his head.
He doesn't look happy.
He does not look happy. He yells at them, and then they throw stuff at him. Uh-oh, but he's still got those big pants on. He's still really tall, and they jump up to grab him. So they hide in the trees. But the trees are actually a giant mammoth. The mammoth is not happy. The mammoth decides to chase them, to chase our evil guy. And our villagers thinks that's hilarious. Oh no, he falls again! Again he falls, and again he gets stuffed around his head. The mammoth leaves, and we're back again to where we were. Our Ook and Gluck trying to run away. So now they're hiding. I see the beehive.
Where's the beef? Oh, this one. And then let's see. Oh, and then they look like they're trying to make a snowman-like creature out of rocks. And then they find some fruit that they pick off the tree for the eyes. There's a pineapple. Oh my goodness. Oh, I see what they're going to do. It looks like they're making a catapult of some sort. And they're going to catapult the pineapple at him. Oh. Oh, and it hits the beehive. Oh. And it's going to fall down his pants, I think. Oh, look at all the bees. There are tons of bees, and he's running away because they're chasing him. And then he falls off the side of a cliff. Oh, and he's not too happy. Oh, my goodness. And they're laughing. They think it's hysterical, and the bees are still chasing him. And he's all gone. That was perfect. All right, chapter 14, Clash of the Cavemen.
Do you want to turn pages? That's super easy.
I'm just going to read. Once the cave people read George and Harold's cave comic, they stopped being afraid of Chippy and his robo-pants. Now they were inspired. Quickly, they divided themselves into groups and began planning their counterattacks. George and Harold watched as the cave people grabbed their own charred sticks from the fire and began drawing out elaborate plans. Even though they could only speak in grunts and groans, they all understood comics and they all knew what needed to be done. Before long, everyone high-fived and sneaked out the back of the cave. The cave people ran up the hillside, tying vines between trees, placing banana peels all over the ground, and setting booby traps everywhere they could think of. Once everyone was ready, George and Harold and Sulu hopped onto Cracker's back, and they flew around the cave to where Tippy was still busy destroying the village. "Oh, Tippy," called George, "where have you been? You're going to miss all the fun." Tippy turned quickly and chased after the four friends, who led him directly into the cave people's traps. As Tippy ran, he glanced down and noticed a vine tied tightly between two tree trunks. Quickly, he screeched to a halt. "Ha, ha, ha," Tippy bellowed. "Did you think I was going to fall for that lame trick?" Tippy rolled his eyes in contempt as he jumped over the vine and landed on a bunch of banana peels. "Yah!" Tippy screamed as he slipped and crashed to the ground. Then Tippy started sliding on the banana peels, down the steep hill towards the cliff below. "No!" Tippy wailed as he slid faster and faster. Finally, Tippy flipped over the edge of the cliff and tumbled into the tar pit below with a mighty ker-sploosh. Tippy was furious. He pulled himself up out of the sticky black tar and screamed, "Is that all you got?" But the cave people had a few more surprises for Tippy. "You stupid cave jerks," Tippy screamed as he finally came to his senses. "Is that all you got?" But unfortunately for Tippy, there was still more to come. "Ah!" screamed Tippy as his tar-covered robo-butt caught on fire. Tippy ran shrieking towards a small pond as the flames spread everywhere. Finally, the screaming robotic fireball plunged deep into the cooling waters of the pond with a gigantic splash. George, Harold, Crackers, Sulu, and the cave people gathered around the edge of the pond to see what had become of their evil nemesis. For a few minutes, everything was calm. Then the surface of the water began to tremble. Suddenly, Tippy's bruised, battered, and burned robo-body rose from the bubbling depths of the pond. "Is that all you got?" Tippy demanded as he lunged towards the cave people and chased after them. But unfortunately for Tippy, they still had much more unpleasantness in store for him. Chapter 15, The Incredibly Graphic Violence, Chapter Part 1 in Flip-O-Rama. Introducing Flip-O-Rama. Here's how it works. As any historian will tell you, flip-o-ramas were first created nearly 200,000 years ago on stone tablets. These cheesy animations were lots of fun to flip, but they were so heavy they often resulted in smashed thumbs and broken fingers. Ancient Egyptians, desperate to solve this problem, invented papyrus around 3500 BC so that flip-o-ramas could be flipped safely by everybody. So please enjoy this ancient tradition, now improved and enhanced by the modern-day miracle of paper. Alright, here's how it works. Step 1. First, place your left hand, inside the dotted lines marked left hand here. Hold the book open flat. Step 2. Grasp the right hand page with your right thumb and index finger inside the dotted lines marked right thumb here. Step 3. Now quickly flip the right hand page back and forth until the page appears to be animated. And it says, for extra fun, try adding your own sound effects. Alright, so remember, flip only page 139. While you are flipping, be sure you can see the picture on page 139 and the one on page 141. If you flip quickly, the two pictures will start to look like one animated picture. Don't forget to add your own sound effects. Alright, so let's see if we can do this. So you can hold, alright, so hold your right thumb here and your left hand here. So you're going to do it like this. Ready? So you're going to go like this. Oh. You guys see it? Oh, what's it look like? You want to try? I have my helper here. He's going to help. You gotta do it a little faster. Oh, what's that crazy noises? Boulder bash. Alright, we got the next one. Alright, so we got that right there. It says, alright. So pages 143 and 145. And it says, remember to flip only page 143. While you are flipping, be sure you can see the picture on page 143 and the one on page 145. If you flip quickly, the two pictures will start to look like one animated picture. Don't forget to add your own sound effects. Alright, so try that one. See how that goes. Oh my goodness. What is this one? I'm going to try it too. Oh, looks like they're getting bounced off the rhino. It's called rhinoplasty. Oh my goodness. Alright, we got another one. This is number 3. So I'm going to read you the instructions again, just in case you don't know. So, alright, well, you do it while I read it. It says, remember, flip only page 147. While you're flipping, be sure you can see the picture on page 147 and the one on page 149. Don't go ahead. If you flip quickly, the two pictures will start to look like one animated picture. And don't forget to add your own sound effects. Alright, so what is the sound effects on this one? Yeah, what is this one? Oh, no. Did you see what happened? That lady jumped on the log and it went right up under him. It's called timber trauma.
Timber trauma.
You want to try to read? No? Okay. Oh, sure. Alright, so we're going to try the next one. Chapter 16. What really caused the Ice Age? Is that all you moaned Tippy as he fell to his battered, smoldering knees. Tippy's giant robotic pants might have been a technological marvel, but they were no match for cavemen cleverness. Tippy was in trouble, but he still had one last trick up his sleeve. He reached down to his control panel and pressed the Freezy Beam 4000's button. Suddenly, the battered top of RoboPants opened up, and the Freezy Beam 4000 rose menacingly from the robotic innards. Instantly, a massive burst of ice blasted at the cave people. Fortunately, they all got out of the way just in time, but the ice kept blasting anyway. Oop, this says emergency shutoff. What's wrong with this thing? Said Tippy as he pressed the Freezy Beam's 4000's off button repeatedly. The button was stuck, so Tippy pulled the emergency shutoff lever. That wouldn't budge either. It's almost as if someone had just tampered with my control panel, said Tippy, unaware that tiptoeing across the floor at that very moment was someone who had just tampered with his control panel. Slightly younger, tiny Tippy, still angry that he had been betrayed by his treacherous twin, had rigged the Freezy Beam 4000 so that it could never be turned off. Now the ice beam was going berserk. Glaciers of synthetic ice, programmed to last for 70,000 years, cascaded from Tippy's Freezy Beam 4000, encasing the trees and securing his robotic feet to the frozen ground. Things were getting out of control. Tippy quickly crawled under his command center, desperately trying to figure out a way to turn off the spewing icebergs. This was slightly younger, tiny Tippy's chance. He reached out with his robo-gloves and grabbed the Goosey Grow 4000. Then, with a mighty leap, he jumped to the opening at the top of the robotic legs and hopped down to the frosty ground below. The ice was spreading at a dangerous rate. Slightly younger Tiny Tippy needed to act fast. With no time to spare, he grabbed a piece of bubblegum from his pocket, chewed it up, read the comic on the wrapper, then jammed the sticky bubblegum into the button of the Goosey Grow 4000. Now, said slightly younger Tiny Tippy, when I press this button down, it'll stick, which is exactly what happened. Goozert! A continuous beam of growth energy burst forth from the goose-shaped contraption. Quickly, slightly younger Tiny Tippy jumped into the energy beam and grew to an impressive 30 feet tall. Awesome! Cried slightly younger Tiny Tippy as he jumped in front of the beam again and again like a child leaping through a lawn sprinkler. Each time he hit the beam of energy, he grew another 30 feet. Oh my goodness. I'm huge! Cried slightly younger Tiny Tippy, who was now towering above the earth at an impressive 120 feet. He reached down to pick up the Goosey Grow 4000 with his robo-glove. Just a few more zaps, and I'll be... Whoops! Cried slightly younger Tiny Tippy, as the Goosey Grow 4000 slipped out of his robo-glove and tumbled down onto the thick ice below him. Unfortunately, the continuously zapping beam of energy was now pointed directly at the gigantic mountain of ice, which caused it to grow and expand and spread out even farther. Quickly, the ice began pushing its way east across the Ohio Valley and west into the part of the earth that would one day be known as Indiana. Then it began shoving its way north into Michigan and Canada and beyond. An accidental glacial period was developing rapidly, and slightly younger Tiny Tippy needed to get out of there fast if he wanted to avoid it. Chapter 17. Have a nice day. George and Harold grabbed their pets and ran as fast as they could to escape the rapidly spreading ice fields. Their cavemen friends were right behind them. Quick, Crackers, said George. You've got to take Sulu and get out of here. It's your only hope. But something was wrong with Crackers. The usually perky pterodactyl seemed to be getting sick. Maybe he's catching a cold, cried Harold. He's not used to the freezing temperatures. Soon they came upon the massive waterfall where Mr. Krupp was tied up. The ice was already beginning to turn the flowing water into frozen slush. We've got to rescue Mr. Krupp, said George. But there's no time, said Harold. We'll all get froze. We don't have a choice, said George. We can't just leave him there. George and Harold ran towards Mr. Krupp and began pulling at the vines, holding him in place. When the cave people saw what the boys were trying to do, they also stopped running and came forward to help. But it was too late. The ice got closer and closer as everyone pulled desperately at the vines and the rapidly freezing water. The frigid, slushy water wrapped around Harold's shirt as thick ice encased George's body. Oh, well, said Harold, as he shivered in the rapidly expanding permafrost. At least we tried our best. Goodbye, said George, as the ice flowed up around his face and covered the top of his head. The end had finally come for George and Harold. It was all over. The only hope they had left was that maybe someday in the future an archaeologist would dig up their fossilized bones and have a lot of explaining to do. But even that hope seemed far-fetched at best. Chapter 18. Something much less far-fetched. Crash! Suddenly, the ice around George and Harold and their cave people friends shattered with a mighty karate chop. You didn't think I'd leave you behind, did you? Said slightly younger Tiny Tippy as he scooped everyone up with one gigantic shovel of his robo-glove. Everyone held on to one another for warmth as slightly younger Tiny Tippy trudged south across the frosty glaciers. It was about this time that George and Harold realized that Mr. Krupp's face was no longer wet. It had been freeze-dried along with everything else around them. So they snapped their fingers, and suddenly our miraculous hero returned. Gee, it's a bit nippy today, said Captain Underpants. Forget about that now, said George, shivering. Quickly, he and Harold filled Captain Underpants in on the severity of the situation, and before long, they all had a plan. Captain Underpants flew out of slightly younger Tiny Tippy's robo-glove and grabbed his massive belt buckle. With one sensational swoosh, Captain Underpants ripped Tippy's pants, belt and all, right off of his robo-legs. Hey, no fair! Screamed slightly younger Tiny Tippy as he stood shivering in his gigantic robotic boxer shorts. Oh, that's kind of funny. Captain Underpants quickly tied the ripped pant legs in a knot and told everybody to climb aboard. Soon all of the good guys were tucked securely into the polyester cotton blend trousers and flying someplace safe and warm. They zipped across a vast ocean and finally came to a place that was not covered with ice. Captain Underpants swooped down and landed near the I don't even know what this is, Chauvet Pont d'Arche cave in southern France. I apologize, I am not French, so that may have not sounded that great. George and Harold said goodbye to their cave people friends. We sure hope you like your new home here, said George. Keep drawing, said Harold, and take care of our pals, Crackers and Sulu, okay? Wait a minute, said George. We can't leave our pets here. Crackers is sick. He needs to see a doctor. Oh, yeah, said Harold. I almost forgot. We've got to get to the future somehow. Quickly, Captain Underpants flew George and Harold and Crackers and Sulu back to the frozen glaciers of North America. If they were ever going to get back to modern times, slightly younger Tiny Tippy was their best bet. All right, Chapter 19, The Vow. When our 5 heroes finally reached slightly younger Tiny Tippy, he didn't seem at all surprised to see them. I'm not at all surprised to see you, said slightly younger Tiny Tippy, as he sipped casually from his water bottle. I'll bet you guys want to ride back to the future, don't you? We sure do, said Captain Underpants. Gee, that would be swell. Slightly younger Tiny Tippy pointed his water bottle at Captain Underpants' face and squeezed. Splash! What the heck is going on here? Said Mr. Krupp, as our 5 heroes began falling to the frozen ground below. Ah! Screamed Harold. We're doomed! Fortunately, slightly younger Tiny Tippy caught them before they hit the ground, but unfortunately he had something even worse in mind for them than a 120-foot drop to their deaths. As slightly younger Tiny Tippy set his Tinkle Time travelometer for a date in the upcoming future, George and Harold bemoaned their continually recurring predicament. Well, here we are again, said George, back in the same mess we always end up in. I know, said Harold. It seems like every time we crack a joke or make a comic book, something terrible happens. You know, said George, if we ever get out of this mess, I think we should stop goofing around all the time. Yeah, I agree, said Harold. We need to quit making comic books and start paying more attention to our schoolwork. And as blue, crackling light began to envelop them, George and Harold made a vow to change their ways. They pledged to give up pranks and jokes and comic books, and they promised to begin taking life seriously and to start acting like responsible grown-ups. Wow, said George, as they all disappeared into a crackling whirlpool of liquid time. I feel more mature already. Me too, said Harold. Chapter 20, 30 Years from Now. Suddenly a giant ball of blue lightning exploded in the southern end of a busy Midwestern city. George and Harold looked around them and saw the familiar sights of cars and houses and fast food restaurants. We're home! Cried George. It sure seems that way, said Harold, but how come everything looks so old? Because we're not back where we started, laughed slightly younger Tiny Tippy. We're 30 years in the future. Why did we come to the future? Asked George. Because, said Tippy, the last time I got rid of Captain Underpants, the whole world was destroyed. I just wanted to make sure that the world could survive the next 30 years without him, and it looks like it can. Tippy marched over to the elementary school and placed George and Harold and their 2 pets on the ground. Get comfortable, boys, said Tippy. I'm about to destroy Captain Underpants once and for all. And I want you kids to have the best seats in the house. George and Harold looked up in horror as slightly younger Tiny Tippy began knocking Mr. Krupp around like a beanbag. I can't watch, said Harold as he petted his pet pterodactyl, who only seemed to be getting sicker. Sulu scampered around the playground, finding twigs and branches and leaves, and weaving them into a nest to help keep Crackers warm. Remember, said George, if we ever get out of this mess, we're going to straighten up and start acting like grown-ups. That's right, said Harold as he placed Crackers into the warm nest that Sulu had made. We're going to be responsible and mature from now on. I don't know if I believe them. As Tippy kicked Mr. Krupp around like a soccer ball, George and Harold got distracted by a loud commotion behind them. 2 teachers were yelling at the students on the playground, instructing them all to stop paying attention to the fierce struggle raging above them and demanding that they straighten up and start acting like grown-ups. As the battle intensified, the obnoxious teachers screamed louder and louder, hurling threats and insults at the curious students. Boy, I sure wish those 2 teachers would chill out, said George. I know, said Harold. They're yelling so loud I can't even hear the fight. Suddenly, a rusty green 2034 Honda Civic pulled into the parking lot, and a familiar-looking character came storming out. It was Mr. Krupp, only this was a 30-year older version of Mr. Krupp. He was wrinklier than George and Harold were used to, with a scruffy white beard and a mustache and pants pulled up to his armpits. Mr. Krupp marched towards the playground, opened up his mouth, and screamed 4 words that sent shivers down George's and Harold's spines. Mr. Beard! Mr. Hutchins! George and Harold froze. "Oh, no," whispered Harold. "Old Mr. Krupp recognized us." "What are we going to do?" asked George. "How are we ever going to get out of this mess?" Old Mr. Krupp marched towards George and Harold, getting closer and closer as they shivered in horror. Then Old Man Krupp walked past George and Harold and continued walking towards the playground. "Mr. Beard, Mr. Hutchins," he screamed again, "get those kids inside right now." "Who's he talking to?" asked George. "I have no idea," said Harold. Finally, the two screaming teachers turned around. Chapter 21, George's and Harold's Worst Nightmare. Oh, somebody else is going to read. Here, you take this, and I will switch with you. I'll turn your page.
Do you know that feeling you get in your... Okay. Do you know that feeling you get when your stomach stinks? It usually occurs just after the realization that something bad has happened or is going to happen. People often get this way when they discover that they forgot to study for a big test, or they're going to miss a school bus, or the giant gulp of milk they just swallowed expired 3 weeks ago. Now imagine that feeling is magnified about
Oh my goodness, like a gajillion times.
a gajillion times. This is the feeling that occurred in George and Harold's stomachs when the two obnoxious screaming teachers turned around. It was dumb. More precisely, it was future versions of themselves. George and Harold have grown up to be teachers, but they weren't the nice, wonderful, imaginative teachers that you might be used to. No, sir. George and Harold had evolved into the terrifying, boring, and vengeful teachers that they were used to. Mr. Krupp squished between the 40-year-old Harold and the 39 3/4-year-old George and slapped a sweaty arm around them. I sure am glad that you fellows are here," said Mr. Krupp. "It's a tough job making everybody miserable, isn't it?" "It sure is, boss," said a 40-year-old Harold. "You know, it's hard to believe that you guys are used to be the craziest kids in the school," said Mr. Krupp. "Thank goodness you both started taking life seriously." "Yeah," said 39 3/4-year-old George. "One day, about 30 years ago, we saw the error of our ways, so we made a vow to straighten up and fly right." "Yep," said 40-year-old Harold. "From now on, it was nothing but serious study, strict discipline, and hey, you kids, cut that out!" George and Harold looked nervously at each other as their adult doubles continued screaming at the unfortunate children on the playground. Remember that vow we just made to stop goofing around and start acting like grown-ups?" asked Harold. "Yeah," said George. "I think we should vow a new vow that unvows are the old vow we just vowed," said Harold. "Let's get vowing," said George. So as the terrifying battle raged above their heads, George and Harold shook hands and promised to always be themselves. They pledged to keep goofing around and make even more comic books and stop taking life so darn seriously. "Let's daydream some more, too," said George. "Yeah," said Harold. "Enough of this sitting still and paying attention stuff." As George and Harold vowed their new vow, something strange began to happen. A soft wind started to blow, and the sound of the wind chimes began to tinkle in the air, and the grown-up versions of George and Harold slowly disappeared. They vanished gradually at first. After a minute or so, Mr. Krupp was left standing there all by himself. Wow, said George. Do you mean it's that easy? All you have to do is make up your mind and stick to it, and you can change the future? Yeah, I guess so, said Harold. George and Harold walked up to old Mr. Krupp, who was looking a little confused, and snapped their fingers. Suddenly, a familiar smile stretched across old Mr. Krupp's face. Well, said George, pointing up the terrifying battle exploding over their heads. What are you waiting for? Yeah, said Harold. You're getting your butt kicked up there. Go help yourself. Quickly, old Mr. Krupp tore off his clothes, dashed into the school, and grabbed a red curtain from his office, and flew out his window with a triumphant tra-la-la.
Switch up the next chapter.
Old Captain Underpants immediately rescued Mr. Krupp and brought him back down to the ground. Wow, I'm sure glad that's over with, said Mr. Krupp. Relax, bub, said George. You're just getting started. And with the snap of George and Harold's fingers, Mr. Krupp returned to his heroic self once again and flew into the sky to fight alongside his future self.
Excellent. All right, now switch readers again. So you can sit here, give her the picture. And then just
Thank you.
sure. Yeah, you just start now. It's fine.
Okay,
So
Where am I starting?
chapter 22.
there we go.
Chapter 22, The Incredibly Graphic Violence Chapter, Part 2, in Fliporama. Remember, flip only page 187. While you are flipping, be sure you can see the picture on page 187 and the page in 189. If you flip quickly, the two pictures will start to look one animated picture. Don't forget, add your own sound effects. A festival of nose hair. Remember, flip only on page 181. While you are flipping, be sure you can see the pictures on 181 and the one on page 183. If you flip quickly, the two pictures will start to look like one animated picture. A sky-high kick in the eye. Remember, flip only on page 185. While you are flipping, be sure you can see the picture on page 195 and on the page 187. If you flip quickly, the two pictures will start to look like one animated picture. Don't forget to add your own sound effects. The tooth hurts. The tooth hurts. Chapter 23, How the Universe Really Began. Slightly younger, tiny Tippy might have been ginormous and powerful, but he was no match for two Captain Underpants. He fell to his massive robotic knees in the thunderous cloud of agonized defeat. But slightly younger, tiny Pippy wasn't ready to give up just yet. He reached down to his control panel and pressed the nuclear bomb button, which was conveniently located between the strawberry milkshake button and the low-fat mint chocolate chip cookie dispenser. Suddenly, a panel at the rear of Bob Boxer's opened up, and a 160-ton thermonuclear bomb emerged. You might have defeated me, said slightly younger tiny Pippy as he pressed the button that started the countdown to Tuesday.
So funny.
But I'll still get the last laugh.
You let me know when you want me to take over. Okay, sure. I'll take this and then you can read. Great job, Evanesh. This is silly. This is a great. Suddenly, a light on the side of the bomb began to flash red. A computerized voice emanating from the bomb's alarm system began the countdown. This bomb will detonate in 60 seconds, said the voice. No! Screamed George. The last time one of those bombs went off, it killed all the dinosaurs. But this bomb is way bigger than the last one, cried Harold. This bomb could blow up the entire planet. Correction, said slightly younger Tiny Tippy. I've just activated my graviton levitator, which will give this bomb more destructive power than a supernova. This thing's gonna blow up our entire galaxy. This bomb will detonate in 30 seconds, said the computerized voice. We're doomed again, screamed Harold. Well, said George, it was fun while it lasted. So long, old friend. Bye, said Harold. As the two friends shook hands, a huge gust of wind almost blew them over. Swoosh! It was Crackers and Sulu. George and Harold's pets whooshed by them as they flew up to the opening of the radioactive robo-boxers and fluttered down to the command center inside. Sulu's bionic brain quickly figured out the complex control panel of the Tinker Time travel meter, and together the two animal friends began mashing down the buttons on the switchboard. This bomb will detonate in 15 seconds, said the computerized voice, as Crackers feverishly pecked at the controls. Finally, Sulu pushed down hard on the Away We Go button, and the radioactive robo-boxes were enveloped in a gigantic ball of blue light. Suddenly, the radioactive robo-boxes and their three occupants were zapped back in time 13.7 billion years ago, back to a time before time existed, before anything existed. There was no Earth, no sun, no planets, no universe. There was nothing at all, except for the computerized countdown and a 160-ton thermonuclear bomb. This bomb will detonate in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Chapter 24, to make a long story short, kabloosh. Chapter 25, the big kabloosh theory. The heat from the exploding supernova caused the universe to spring into existence and expand rapidly. As it expanded, it also began to cool, allowing its energy to be converted into lots of different subatomic particles. It wasn't long before these particles combined to form atoms, which combined to form matter, which combined to form stars and planets and you and me and everything around us. Scientists usually refer to this event as the Big Bang Theory, but to be honest, the explosion sounded way more like a kabloosh than a simple bang. I guess you just had to be there. What have we learned today? Remember at the beginning of this book when I told you you'd be smarter by page 210 than the world's most brilliant scientist? Well, congratulations. You now know what killed the dinosaurs, who started the last ice age, and how our universe actually began. Unfortunately, this information is not something you can use for any practical benefits, so if you ever get tested on this stuff in school, please don't answer the truth. I can guarantee you it will not go well. This is the unfortunate fate of super smart people like us. There is really a place where we can use our vast knowledge, so we must be content to simply roll our eyes at people, shake our heads patronizingly, and sing the inspiring old song, I'm smarter than you, na 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 na. For your convenience, sheet music has been provided on the following page. That's the I'm Smarter Than You song. Meanwhile, 30 years from now, where did they go? Cried George, as he looked up into the sky where Tippy's radioactive robo-boxes had just stood. They disappeared, said Harold. They just vanished without a trace. Captain Underpants and his beardy old twin flew down to George and Harold. What are we going to do now? Asked old Captain Underpants. Why don't you go fly into that school and splash some water on your face, said Harold. Sure thing, boss, said old Captain Underpants. He flew straight to the nearest drinking fountain, and in no time at all, he returned to his crabby old self. Well, said George, what are we going to do now? We're stuck in the future without a time machine. George, said Harold as he looked down at Cracker's nest. We've got no money, no identification, no nothing, said George. George, said Harold again, looking closer into the nest. It's not like we can just go back to school and start over where we left off, said George. George, said Harold a third time. What? Asked George finally. Harold pointed at the nest that Sulu had made for Crackers. In the center of the nest were 3 purple and orange speckled eggs. George's mouth dropped open. What are those? He cried. I guess Crackers wasn't sick after all, said Harold. He was pregnant. But Crackers is a boy. Boys can't lay eggs. Well, maybe Crackers is a girl, said Harold. Oh, yeah, said George. I guess that would make more sense. George and Harold carefully picked up the eggs and examined them. We've got to keep these eggs warm until Crackers and Sulu get back, said George. But we don't know where they went, said Harold. We don't even know if they will be back. Then we're just going to have to raise these eggs on our own, said George. That's the least we can do. Chapter 28, the final chapter of the very last Captain Underpants epic novel. George and Harold and Captain Underpants each held an egg close to their bodies to keep them warm. Then they started walking. Where are we going to go? Said Harold. I guess we should try our houses first, said George. Maybe our parents still live there. Good idea, said Harold. Suddenly, a bright ball of flashing light appeared in front of them. The flashing got more and more intense until it finally exploded with a blast of crackling lightning. In there, where the flashlight ball of light had been, was a gigantic, glow-in-the-dark robotic squid. The top of the robo-squid opened, and George and Harold's nemesis, Melvin Sneedley, popped his head up. Greetings, said Melvin. I have come from the past to bring you guys back home. Hey, wait a minute, said George incredulously. How did you know where to find us? Let's just say an old friend led me to you, said Melvin. Okay, said George. Works for me, said Harold. You see, Melvin continued, when I designed Sulu's robotic endoskeleton, I installed a... Boring, said George, interrupting. Yeah, said Harold. We stopped listening like 10 seconds ago. Well, listen to this, Melvin shouted as he reached down and grabbed our heroes with his robo-squid arms. You 3 losers and your precious eggs are coming with me. Where are you taking us? Cried George. You'll see soon enough. Melvin laughed manically. You'll see soon enough. Suddenly, the gigantic, glow-in-the-dark, time-traveling super squid began to shake and sputter in a buzzing ball of electrified light. Oh no, cried George. Here we go again, cried Harold. And coming next, just when you thought it was safe to flush. Oh no, Captain Underpants. Retaliation Turbo Toilet 2000. Captain Underpants goes to 11. There we go. And evidence. This is doing excellent. Okay, I'll put this in the can.
Hello, it's us again. Before you read this book, there's some things you should know. So Harold and I have created this informative pamphlet to fill you in on the details. Please don't let this comic fall into the wrong hands. George Beard and Harold Hutchins represent a Deny Everything production. Captain Wedgie Wars, Episode 1, The Phantom Principal. A long time ago in an elementary school far, far away, there were 2 cool kids named George and Harold. We rule, me too. They had an evil principal named Mr. Corrupt who was strong in the ways of 3 forces. Blah, blah. He forced them to study. Blah, blah, blah. He forced them to clean, blah blah blah, and he forced them to behave, ha ha ha. So George and Harold hypnotized him. You will obey our every command. Snap. Okay. You are now Captain Underpants. Okay, ha ha ha. It started out as a joke, but it wasn't funny for long. Ha ha ha. Tra-la-la. Hey, come back. Mr. Cup thought he really was the world's greatest superhero. He got into all kinds of trouble. George and Harold had to save him, and the entire planet. Twice. Now the only way they can turn Captain Underpants back into Mr. Krupp is to pour water over his head. But the worst part is that George and Harold have to keep an eye on Mr. Krupp. Blah blah blah. Because for some strange reason, whenever he hears somebody snap their fingers, snap, he turns back into you-know-who. Tra-la-la. So, whatever you do, please don't snap your fingers around Mr. Krupp. You heard the man. Please, please, please don't snap those fingers. This has been a public service announcement from George and Harold, who still deny everything. Chapter 1. George and Harold. This is George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is the kid on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold is the one on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. If you were looking for a few words to describe George and Harold, you might come up with kind, funny, smart, determined, and deep, just as their principal, Mr. Krupp. He'll tell you that George and Harold are kinda funny, lookin' smart, Alex who are determined to drive everybody off the deep end. But don't listen to him. George and Harold are actually very clever and good-hearted boys. Their only problem is that they're fourth graders, and at George and Harold's school the fourth graders are expected to sit still and pay attention for 7 hours a day. George and Harold are just not good at that. The only thing George and Harold are good at is being silly. Unfortunately, George and Harold's silliness gets them into trouble every now and then. Sometimes it gets them in a lot of trouble. And one time it got them into so much trouble it almost caused the entire earth to be destroyed by an army of giant evil zombie nerds. But before I can tell you that story, I have to tell you this story. Chapter 2. The Evil Space Guys. One dark, clear night in Piqua, Ohio, a flaming object was seen streaking across the quiet midnight sky. It shone brightly for a second or two, then fizzled just above Jerome Hortwood's elementary school. Nobody gave it a second thought. The next day, everything seemed pretty normal. Nobody noticed anything different about the school. Nobody paid any attention to the roof. Of course, nobody looked up and said, "Hey, what's that big spaceship thing doing on the roof of the school?" Perhaps if you had the horrible ordeal that followed might never have happened, and you wouldn't be sitting here reading about it right now. But they didn't. It did, and well, here we are. As we can all plainly see, there was a spaceship on the top of the building, and inside that spaceship were 3 of the most evil, hideous, and miraculous spacemen ever to set foot on the roof of a small, wide western elementary school. The names were Zork, Klax, and Jennifer. Their mission? To take over planet Earth. "First," said Zork, "we must find a new way to infiltrate the school. Then," said Klax, "we will turn all the children into giant super-powered evil zombie nerds. Finally," said Jennifer, "we will use them to take over the world." Zork and Klax laughed and laughed. "Silence, you fools," barked Jennifer. "If our plan is to work, we must wait until it is narratively convenient. In the meantime, we will watch their every move on a trinoscope." Chapter 3. Fun with Science. Early that same morning, George and Harold were sitting in their 10:15 a.m. science class while making silly noises. Meow, George mowed softly without moving his lips. Grrr, growled Harold without opening his mouth. There it is again, exclaimed the science teacher, mystified. I distinctively heard a cat and a dog in here. We didn't hear anything, the children said, trying not to laugh. I must be hearing things again, Mr. Fide worried. Maybe we should leave and go see a doctor, said George with concern. I can't, said Mr. Fide. Today is the day of the big volcano experiment. The children all groaned. Mr. Fide's science experiments were usually the most idiotic thing on earth. They almost never worked and were always boring. But today's experiment was different. Mr. Fide brought in a large, fake-looking volcano that he had made out of papier-mâché. He filled the volcano with a box of ordinary baking soda. Baking soda is called a sodium barnate, explained Mr. Fide. Meow. Said Mr. Fide. Did any of you children just hear? Never mind. Mr. Fide opened up a bottle of clear liquid. Now watch what happens when I pour vinegar into the baking soda, he said. The children watched as the tiny volcano started to rumble. Soon a large glob of foamy goop sputtered from the top. The goop poured over the desk and rippled onto the floor, creating a huge mess. Oops, said Mr. Fide. I guess I used too much baking soda. George and Harold were stunned. How did you do that? Asked Harold. Well, said Mr. Fide, the vinegar acts as a liberating agent which releases the gases carbonated radical element of the sodium meow. Mr. Fide paused. Oh, excuse me, children. I've got to go and see a doctor. Mr. Fide put on his coat and hurried out the door. George and Harold got up and studied the mess volcano experiment with great interest. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Asked George. I think I'm thinking what you're thinking, said Harold. Chapter 4, The Setup. After school, the two boys raced to George's house and got down to business. George and Harold sat down and began creating a bogus cupcake recipe. We'll just add a box of baking soda and a bottle of vinegar to this recipe, said George, and whoever makes these cupcakes will get a big surprise. Let's add 2 boxes of baking soda and 2 bottles of vinegar to the recipe, said Harold. That way they'll get an even bigger surprise. Good idea, laughed George. Chapter 5, Mr. Krup's Crispy Cupcakes. The next morning at school, George and Harold strolled into the cafeteria and taped a festival-looking card to the kitchen. Soon the lunch ladies arrived. Oh, look, said Mrs. Crete, the head lunch lady. Today is Mr. Krup's birthday, and he'd like us to make a batch of cupcakes just for him. Isn't that cute? I've got an idea, said the cook, Mrs. D. Why don't we surprise him and make a cupcake for the whole school? Good thinking, said Miss Crete. Let's see now. This recipe serves 10, and we'll have about 1,000 students and faculty in the school, so we'll need 100 eggs, 150 cups of flour, 200 boxes of baking soda, 7 quarts of green food coloring, 56 of butter, 150 cups of sugar, and let's see. Oh yes, 200 bottles of vinegar. The lunch ladies scurried about, gathering everything they needed. They dumped the eggs, food coloring mix, milk, and baking soda into a large vat and began to mix thoroughly. Then somebody poured in the vinegar. What happened next? No, please shake this book back and forth uncontrollably when you read the following word. Also, shout it as loud as you can. Don't worry, you won't get in trouble. Kabloosh! Here comes the goop. A giant wave of green goop crashed through the cafeteria doors and splashed down the halls, swallowing everything in its path. Book bags, bulletin boards, lunch boxes, coat racks, trophy cases. Nothing could stand in the way of the gigantic green globe. It traveled down the north, east, and west wings of the school, covering everything from the drinking fountains on this page. It squished into lockers and squashed down the stairs. It billowed. It wasn't long before the green goop began spilling into all the classrooms. "Uh-oh," said George. "Something tells me the lunch ladies made more than just one batch of Mr. Crup's crispy cupcakes." But that was their idea, not ours," cried Harold. "Speaking of ideas," said George, "I've got a good one." "What?" asked Harold. "Run!" George cried. The wrath of the cafeteria ladies. Next afternoon, as cleaning crews sorted through the sticky green hallways and sticky green classrooms, the cafeteria ladies had a meeting with Mr. Crupt in his sticky green office. "But it wasn't even my birthday!" cried Mr. Crupt. "We know you had nothing to do with this," said Mr. Crete. "We think it was those two awful boys, George and Harold." "Well, duh!" said Mr. Crupt, rolling his eyes. "Of course it was George and Harold. But do you have any proof?" "Proof?" said the lunch ladies. "Why, George and Harold are always playing tricks on us. Every day they change the letters around on our lunch sign. They put pepper in the napkin dispensers and unscrew the caps on the salt shakers. They start food fights. They also go sledding on our lunch trays. They make everybody laugh so that milk squirts out of their noses. And they're constantly creating these awful comic books about us." Chapter 8. Captain Underpants and the Night of the Living Lunch Ladies. Captain Underpants and the Night of the Living Lunch Ladies. Late one Friday afternoon, the lunch ladies were cleaning up the cafeteria. "There's lots of half-eaten food in this trash barrel. We'll pour it in and we'll serve it again next week. Waste not, want not." But while they were working, the Jennifer Stanley locked the school for the weekend. The lunch ladies were trapped inside. Help! They were forced to eat their own food to survive. Past the lips and over the gums. "Look out, tummy, here it comes." When the janitor returned on Monday morning, the lunch ladies were dead, victims of their own cooking. Oopsie daisies. The janitor took the dead lunch ladies up the hill to bury them. This looks like a good place. Bury dead stuff here. But it wasn't. Warning, this hill is haunted. Whatever you do not bury dead stuff here. Help! The lunch ladies arose from the dead. They're hungry for brains and they just attacked the gym teacher. But I thought you said they were hungry for brains. This looked like a job for Captain Underpants. What seems to be the problem? Living dead lunch ladies. Don't worry, I'll give them wedgies. Oh no, wedgie power doesn't work on the living dead. They got into a big fight. Captain Underpants was faster than a speedy waistband, more powerful than boxer shorts, and able to leap tall buildings without getting a wedgie. Tra-la-la-la-la. But the lunch ladies were strong too. They ran faster than their runny meatloaf gravy. They were more powerful than the stretch of their sloppy Joe casserole, and they could leap tall buildings with the gassy after effects of their Texas-style three-bean chili con carne.
How do you good job? Thanks, Avinash. Soon they were all on top of a tall building. "We've got you now, waistband warrior." "Not so fast." Captain Underpants pressed a button on his utility waistband, and out popped a roll of toilet paper. Even the living dead can't escape the toilet paper of justice. Captain Underpants lassoed the lunch ladies, but they had a trick up their sleeves. Lunch lady brand Salisbury steak sauce. They poured the steak sauce on the toilet paper of justice. Sss. We're free! Let's get 'em, girls! Uh-oh. Ah! Captain Underpants tossed the toilet paper of justice. Up it went, up around the flagpole, and he swung to safety. Clunk, splat, goosh, right in the trash barrel. The lunch ladies weren't so lucky. Tra-la-la-la! Hooray for Captain Underpants! Cheered the crowd. Chapter 9, Quittin' Time. We're fed up with those two boys, cried Miss Crant. They're always making fun of our cooking. Yeah, said Mrs. DePoint. Our food isn't that bad. I ate here once and hardly got sick at all. Well, I can't punish them if we don't have any proof, said Mr. Krupp. Fine, said the lunch ladies. Then we quit. Ladies, cried Mr. Krupp. Be reasonable. You can't just quit on such short notice. But the lunch ladies didn't care. They marched right out of Mr. Krupp's sticky green office, and that was the end of that. Rats, cried Mr. Krupp. Now where am I going to find 3 new lunch ladies by tomorrow morning? Suddenly there was a knock on Mr. Krupp's door. 3 very large women wearing lots of makeup walked into his office. Hello, said the first woman. My name is, Zortex. These are my, sisters, Claxette and, Jenniferette. We've come to apply for jobs as cafeteria ladies. Wow, said Mr. Krupp. Do you have any experience? No, said Claxette. Do you have any credentials? Asked Mr. Krupp. No, said Zortex. Do you have any references? Asked Mr. Krupp. No, said Jenniferette. You're hired, said Mr. Krupp. Wonderful. Now, our plan to take over the world our plan to feed the children healthy, nutritional meals is underway. The 3 new lunch ladies laughed horribly. Then they left Mr. Krupp's office and got started preparing the next day's lunch menu. Well, that was easy, said Mr. Krupp. Now take care of George and Harold. Chapter 10, Busted. George and Harold were in study hall when they heard the dreaded announcement over the intercom. George Beard and Harold Hutchins, please report to Mr. Krupp's office immediately. Oh, no, cried Harold. We're busted. No way, said George. Remember, what happened yesterday was not our fault. We didn't do it. It was an accident. But Mr. Krupp was not all that understanding. I can't prove it, but I know you boys are responsible for yesterday's disaster, Mr. Krupp said. I'm going to punish you by taking away your cafeteria privileges for the rest of the year. No more cafeteria food for you two. No more cafeteria food? Whispered Harold. I thought he said he was going to punish us. Yeah, George smiled. Maybe if we're really bad, he'll take away our homework privileges too. I heard that, screamed Mr. Krupp. From now on, you boys are going to have to pack your own lunches and eat in my office so I can keep an eye on you. Rats, said Harold. But we didn't do it, George protested. We didn't do it. Too bad, bub, said Mr. Krupp. Boy, said George, this is the first time we've gotten in trouble for something we didn't do. Unless you count all those times we didn't do our homework, said Harold. Oh, yeah, laughed George. Chapter 11, Brown Bagging It. The next day, George and Harold each brought their own sandwiches to Mr. Krupp's office for lunch. I'll trade you half of my peanut butter and gummy worm sandwich, said George, for half of your tuna salad with chocolate chips and miniature marshmallow sandwich. Sure, said Harold. You want some barbecue sauce on that? You kids are disgusting, Mr. Krupp shouted. Soon George and Harold were munching on potato chips with whipped cream and chocolate sprinkles. Mr. Krupp was turning green. What's for dessert? Asked Harold. Hard-boiled eggs dipped in hot fudge and Skittles, said George. Arr! Screamed Mr. Krupp. I can't stand it any more. He got up and stumbled out of the door for some fresh air. You know, said George, now that Mr. Krupp is gone, we could run to the cafeteria and change the letters around on the lunch sign. Cool, said Harold. Today's lunch: freeze-dried worm guts, Boston-baked boogers, zombie nerd milkshakes. So George and Harold sneaked to the cafeteria, but when they read the lunch sign, they were a bit confused. "What's going on here?" said George. "It looks like somebody's already changed the sign," said Harold. "Forget the sign," said George. "Look at everybody. They've changed." It was true. All the kids and teachers in school were entering the cafeteria looking as normal as ever, but they were leaving the cafeteria looking quite different. "Look!" cried George. "They're all wearing broken eyeglasses held together with masking tape, and they've all got vinyl pocket protectors. They've all turned into—" "Nerds!" Harold gasped. "And look at their skin," said George. "They're all gray and clammy. That could mean only one thing." "They're zombie nerds?" asked Harold. "I'm afraid so," said George. "Let's just hope they're friendly," said Harold. "Who ever heard of a friendly zombie nerd?" asked George. "I'm afraid," Harold whined. "There's no time to be afraid," said George. "We've got to get back to the bottom of this." "That's what I'm afraid of," said Harold. Chapter 12: The Bottom of This. George and Harold crawled into the cafeteria and sneaked through the kitchen doors. There they hid behind a table while the incredibly naughty cafeteria ladies from outer space discussed their plans to take over the world. "Look at those puny earthlings," laughed Zorks. "They're all drinking evil zombie nerd milkshakes and transforming before our very eyes." "It won't be long now," said Clax. "Tomorrow we'll feed them super evil rapid growth juice. Then they will grow to the size of Zekflick trees." "Exactly," sneered Jennifer. "Then we'll unleash our giant evil zombie nerds upon the earth, and soon the planet will be ours." The three evil space guys threw back their heads and laughed hysterically. "We've got to tell Mr. Krupp about this," Harold whispered. "Right," whispered George. "But first, we've got to get rid of that super evil rapid growth juice." George carefully reached up and swiped the carton of juice. "What should we do with it?" asked Harold. "Let's pour it out the window," said George. "That way it won't do any damage." "Good idea," said Harold. While the naughty cafeteria ladies continued laughing, George quietly emptied the carton of super evil rapid growth juice out the window. "You know," whispered Harold, "Mr. Krupp is never going to believe that sinister cafeteria ladies from outer space have turned everybody into evil zombie nerds." "Sure he'll believe us. He's got to believe us," said George. "I hope he believes us." Chapter 13: He Doesn't Believe Them. "That's the most ridiculous story I've ever heard," laughed Mr. Krupp. "But it's true," cried Harold. "Yeah," said George. "Everybody in the entire school is an evil zombie nerd. The kids, the teachers, everybody." "All right," said Mr. Krupp. "I'll prove it to you." He pressed the button on the intercom and called for his secretary. Soon Miss Anthrop entered the room. She was dressed in a pink polka-dot polyester dress with orthopedic knee-high stockings and ugly brown arch support loafers. "See," said Harold, "she's dressed like a nerd." "She always dresses like that," snapped Mr. Krupp. "But she's gray and clammy and reeks of freakish, zombified death," cried George. "She always smells like that," Mr. Krupp argued, "and she's always gray and clammy, too." George and Harold had to admit that school secretaries were not very good subjects to compare and contrast with evil zombie nerds. But then Miss Anthrop leaned over and took a huge bite out of Mr. Krupp's desk. "Must destroy Earth," she moaned as she took another bite. Even Mr. Krupp had to agree that Miss Anthrop was acting a bit more evil than usual. So George and Harold took Miss Krupp down to the cafeteria to confront the evil lunch ladies. Suddenly, out of the shadows stepped the evil Zorks. "Gotcha!" Zorks cried, and he grabbed onto Harold's shoulders. "Ah!" screamed Harold. He squirmed away, pulling Zork's gloves off and revealing two slimy green tentacles. "See, Mr. Krupp," said George, "we told you they were space guys." "You fool!" screamed Zorks. "Now we will destroy you." The evil Zork pointed his tentacle at George, Harold, and Mr. Krupp and snapped his fingers. Snap! Suddenly Mr. Krupp began to change. A heroic grin spread across Mr. Krupp's face. He threw out his chest and placed his fist firmly at his sides, looking quite triumphant. "Uh-oh," said George. "That evil space guy just snapped his fingers. Now Mr. Krupp is turning into you-know-who." Hey, wait a second, said Harold. Tentacles don't have fingers. You can't snap a tentacle. There's no time to argue about the physical improbabilities of this story, said George. We've got to stop Mr. Krupp from changing into Captain Underpants before it's too late. Chapter 14, It's Too Late. Mr. Krupp turned and dashed out the door. His clothes flew off behind him as the hallways echoed with the jubilant proclamations about the superiority of underwear. George and Harold dashed after him, but the door was quickly blocked by Zorks, Clax, and Jennifer. You want to get out of this kitchen? The evil Jennifer mocked. You gotta go through us. George grabbed a rolling pin. Harold grabbed a cast iron frying pan. I sure hope we don't have to resort to incredibly graphic violence, said Harold. Me too, said George. Chapter 15, The Incredibly Graphic Violence. Chapter Part 1 in Flip-O-Rama. Warning, the following chapter contains terribly inappropriate scenes that certainly do not belong in a children's book. If you are offended by such senselessness, please put this book down immediately. Raise your arms over your head and run screaming to your nearest shoe store. When you get there, ask them to make you a cheeseburger. Note, this probably won't help you a bit, but we think it would be funny. Introducing Flip-O-Rama. Here's how it works. Lately, there have been many groundbreaking advances in the field of animation. There's claymation, dynamation, Japanese, and even computer animation. But if you ask us, nothing beats the economy-sized thrills of cheesy animation technology, also known as Step 1. Flip-O-Rama, also known as Flip-O-Rama. Step 1. Place your left hand inside the dotted lines marked left hand here. Hold the book open flat. Step 2. Grasp the right hand page with your right thumb and index finger inside the dotted lines marked right thumb here. Step 3. Now quickly flip the right hand page back and forth until the picture appears to be animated. Pages 79 and 81. Remember, flip only page 79. While you are flipping, be sure you can see the picture on page 79 and then the one on page 81. If you flip quickly, the two pictures will start to look like one animated picture. Don't forget to add your own sound effects. George pins a predator. Flip-O-Rama 2, pages 83 and 85. Remember, flip only page 83. While you are flipping, be sure you can see the picture on page 83 and the one on 85. If you flip quickly, the two pictures will start to look like one animated picture. Don't forget to add your own sound effects. Harold bonks a bad guy. Bong. Flip-O-Rama 3, pages 87 and 89. Remember, flip only page 87. While you are flipping, be sure you can see the picture on page 87 and the one on 89. If you flip quickly, the two pictures will start to look like one animated picture. Don't forget to add your own sound effects. George and Harold saved the day. For now. Yay! Yay! Go. Okay.
Chapter 16, The Assault of the Equally Evil Lunchroom Zombie Nerds. George and Harold had barely caught their breath when Captain Underpants finally showed up. Tra-la-la-la-la, he said. I'm here to fight for truth, justice, and all that is pre-shrunk and cottony. While you were back in Chapter 15, we needed you, asked George. I was at the shoe store ordering a cheeseburger, said Captain Underpants. While our three heroes were talking, nobody noticed that Zorks, Clocks, and Jennifer had slithered away. They wandered. Space guys approached the lunchroom loudspeaker and called for their evil zombie nerds. Zombie nerds, instructed Jennifer. Destroy Captain Underpants and his little friends too. Soon every evil zombie and nerd in the entire school put down the Omni magazines and headed for the cafeteria. Must destroy Underpants, they groaned. Must destroy Underpants. Suddenly our three heroes were surrounded by evil, vicious zombie nerds. Closer and closer they came. Oh no, cried George. What do we do now? To the underwear cave, shouted Captain Underpants. There is no underwear cave, said Harold. Really? Said Captain Underpants. Well, let's just climb up that ladder instead. George, Harold, and Captain Underpants scurried up the ladder, and soon they were on the roof. Well, we're safe now, said Harold. Yep, said George. That's for sure, said Captain Underpants. Chapter 17. Oh yeah? It didn't take long before George, Harold, and Captain Underpants looked behind them. Hey, said Harold, what's the big spaceship thingy doing on the roof of the school? And where did that super evil, rapidly growing dandelion come from? Asked Captain Underpants. George and Harold gasped. They looked at each other with the sudden panicked realization that only children who have accidentally created a giant mutated garden nauseous would know. Scampered George, we have no idea what that happened. Yeah, said Harold, absolutely no idea at all. At that moment the door of the roof swung open. Zorks poked his evil head out and shouted, We've got you now! With no space else to run, the three heroes quickly scurried up the ladder of the big spaceship thingy and closed the door behind them. Inside the spaceship, George, Harold, and Captain Underpants discovered a refrigerator filled with strange juices. Look, said George, here's a carton of anti-evil zombie nerd juice. How convenient. And look at this, said Harold, a carton of ultra-nasty self-destruction juice. Now this could be in handy. And look what I've found now, said Captain Underpants, a whole carton of extra-strength super-powered juice. Hey, give me that, said George, snapping the carton out of Captain Underpants' hand. Chapter 18. Space Slaves. Suddenly the door of the spaceship swung open and the three evil space guys slithered inside. Step away from the refrigerator, screamed Jennifer, and you get into that jail cell. George and Harold and their juice cartons behind their backs, and our three heroes stepped quickly into the jail cell. Zork started to fill up the engine and the spaceship lifted off. It rose a few hundred feet in the air and hovered over the school. You three punny earthlings are very fortunate, said Jennifer. If you will get to witness the destruction of your planet from the safety of your jail cell. Afterwards you will have the honor of being our obedient space slaves. Aw, man, said George and Harold. Quickly, Clack, said Jennifer. Get me a carton of super evil rapid growth juice. From the refrigerator, we can pour it on our spray gun and shower upon our evil zombie nerds. Chapter 19. The Big Switcheroo. Clax returned with a carton of super evil rapid growth juice and placed it on the control panel. Soon, said Jennifer, Earth would be ours. The three aliens threw back their heads and laughed and laughed. Suddenly George got an idea. He whispered to Harold for a second or two, and then he quietly reached through the bars of his jail cell and swiped Clax's carton of super evil rapid growth juice. George carefully peeled the label off the carton and stuck it over the label of his ultra-nasty self-destruction juice. While he was busy doing that, Harold reached through the bars and switched the labels of the spray gun and the fuel tank. Finally, George reached back through the bars and put his carton of ultra-nasty self-destruction juice, which now read Super Evil Rapid Growth Juice, on the control panel. I don't get it, whispered Captain Underpants. The fuel tank now says spray gun, and the spray gun now says fuel tank. And the rapid growth juice has replaced with self-destruction juice. What's it all mean? You'll find out, said Harold sadly. When the three evil space guys had finished laughing triumphantly, Jennifer reached for the carton that read Super Evil Rapid Growth Juice and poured it into the nozzle that read spray gun. "Oh, I get it," said Captain Underpants. "The space guys didn't pour growth juice into the spray gun. He poured self-destruction into the fuel tank." "Yep," George said sadly. "And that meant the spaceship thingy is going to explode into millions of pieces." "Right," said Harold gloomily. The spaceship began to sputter and shake as smoke billowed out of the control panels. Soon sparks were flying and ceiling tiles were falling. Captain Underpants smiled proudly because he had figured out George's plan. But his smile didn't last long. "Hey," he cried, "we're in the spaceship thingy. What's going to happen to us?" We had to sacrifice ourselves to save the world," said George. "I'm afraid we're not going to make it." "Of course we'll make it," cried Captain Underpants. "We've got wedgie power on our side." Chapter 20 The Great Escape. Captain Underpants grabbed a roll of toilet paper from the jail cell lavatory. "We can swing us to safety on this," he said. "You can swing on toilet paper," Harold said. "Sure I can," said Captain Underpants. "I just did it in my last comic book." Captain Underpants opened the jail cell window and tossed the toilet paper into tall trees below them. "Come on, fellas," he said. "Let's swing out of here before the spaceship explodes." "That toilet paper won't hold you," said George. "It's not strong enough." "Sure it is," said Captain Underpants. "It's two play." George and Harold grabbed Captain Underpants' cape. "Don't jump!" they cried, but Captain Underpants wouldn't listen. He jumped out the window, and George and Harold still clinging to his cape. "Ah!" they screamed as they fell from the ground and were killed instantly. Splat. Just kidding. Of course the toilet paper could not support the weight of the three heroes. For a moment it looked like they were doomed. Kaboom! But suddenly Captain Underpants' red polyester cape opened up like a parachute. Whoop! George, Harold, and the waistband warrior floated down safely to the spaceship above them. Exploded. Kaboom! Hallelujah, cried Harold. "We're not gonna die. We're not gonna die." "Or," said George, "maybe we are." Chapter 21 The Deliriously Dangerous, Death-Defying Dandelion of Doom. George, Harold, and Captain Underpants floated downward directly into the waiting jaws of the Dandelion of Doom. "Aw, man," cried Harold, "we could have gotten killed in a cool exploding spaceship, but instead we're gonna get eaten by a dandelion. How humiliating." "Yeah," George moaned, "people are gonna be giggling at our funerals." The dandelion munched Captain Underpants and swung George and Harold around like a couple of rag dolls. The two boys flew off and landed on the roof of the school. "Help me! Help me!" screamed Captain Underpants as the dandelion doom swung him back and forth. "What should we do?" cried Harold. "I've got an idea," said George. "It's a bad idea, and I know we're gonna regret it, but I've got to act fast. The fate of the entire planet is on our hands." The next time the giant evil dandelion lurched toward the boys, George poured some extra-strength super-powered juice into Captain Underpants' mouth. "What do you think is going to happen now?" asked Harold. "I don't know," said George, "but I have a feeling it's going to involve incredibly graphic violence." Chapter 22 The Incredibly Graphic Violence Chapter Part 2 in Flip-O-Rama. Warning: the following chapter contains scenes of a very unpleasant nature. All nastiness was performed by a qualified stuntman in a licensed stunt plant. Do not attempt the battle of evil dandelions at home, even if you have recently consumed extra-strength superpower juice. Such behaviors could result in serious boo-boos. Flip-O-Rama 4. Remember, flip only pages 119 while you are flipping. Be sure to see you can see the pictures on 119 and the pictures on 121. If you flip quickly, the two pictures will start to look like one animated picture. When dandelions attack. Flip-O-Rama 5. Remember, flip only page 123 While you are flipping, be sure you can see the picture on page 123 and the page on 125. If you flip quickly, the two pictures will start to look like one animated picture. The Wedgie Weed Whacker. Flip-O-Rama 6. Remember, flip only page 127. While you are flipping, be sure you can see the picture on page 127 and the page on 129. If you flip quickly, the two pictures will start to look like one animated picture. Hooray for Captain Underpants! The 23rd chapter. Captain Underpants, with the help of his newly developed superpowers, had defeated the deliriously dangerous, death-defying Dandelion of Doom. Now the only thing left was to stop the evil zombie of nerds. "Oh, how are we going to conquer the evil zombie nerds?" asked George. "How will we ever change them back to normal?" "Well, we could try this anti-evil zombie nerd juice," said Harold. George rolled his eyes. "I was hoping for something a little more dramatic," he said, "but we're running out of pages. Let's do it." So Harold mixed up a batch of anti-evil zombie nerd root beer and ordered everybody in the school to drink some. The evil zombie nerds lined up. "Most must drink root beer," they moaned. "Must drink root beer." When the last zombie nerd had swallowed the last sip of root beer, George ordered Captain Underpants to get dressed back up like Mr. Cropped. "But I'll lose my superpowers if I put on clothing," said Captain Underpants. "The power of underwear must be—" "Just put the clothes back on, bub," George instructed. Captain Underpants did as he was told, and George poured water over the hero's head. "Now all we can do is wait," said Harold. "Wait and hope that everybody returns to normal." To make a long story short, they did. "Back to normal? Hooray," said Harold. "It's great to have everybody back to normal." "Yep," said George. "That's for sure." But back to normal probably wasn't the best choice of words. For a while the students had faculty and were the same as they'd always been. Something had definitely changed about Mr. Cropped. Because from that day on, whenever he heard the sounds of fingers snapping, snap, Mr. Cropped not only turned back into you-know-who, but he also had extra-strength superpowers. And if you thought he was hard for George and Harold to keep up with him before, well, you ain't seen nothing yet. "Oh no!" screamed Harold. "Here we go again!" screamed George. Tra-la-la-la-la.
The end.
The end.
Nice job, Evanesh.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was excellent.
It's about time to close. Thank you for joining us for our banned book readathon. If you're either watching live or you tune in later to watch this, as we know, Banned Book Week is all about celebrating our freedom to read. As William Douglas says, restriction of free thought and free speech is the most dangerous of all subversions. It is the one un-American act that can most easily defeat us. So we hope we see you at the library to read more of our Challenger banned books, and we hope that you enjoyed our brief reading of the Adventures of Captain Underpants series.